This is Tyler Beecher, Executive Chairman at Trace3. I want to welcome everybody to today's Fireside Chat. It's a little early on the West Coast to call it a Fireside Chat, but Tom, you're back east, so we'll count it. It's evening time there, and thank you for having us. By the way, again, we're with Tom Mendoza today and Mike Wing. Mike is the president of Vast Data, and Tom is a board member, and we very much look forward to hearing from both of you today. Mike, if it's okay with you, I always like to gush on Tom just a little bit. He'll scold me later.
Perfect.
Tom and I go way back. Tom's famous in this industry. He's a legend, but he was the president and vice chairman of NetApp for a lot of years, brought that company out of obscurity to truly to greatness. And we can talk about whether it was the top performing stock on NASDAQ for a lot of years, but really an absolute legend as it relates to building teams, building cultures, and servicing clients. Many of you know Tom, if you have a Trace3 background, obviously a huge friend to us. He's keynoted many of our events. Some of you know that Tom was the Outlier Lifetime Achievement Award winner. We've only given out 2 of those, John Chambers being the other one, but super proud of that. And then last but not least, Tom, and I promise I'll stop, but many of you know the Mendoza School of Business at Notre Dame that bears Tom's name and his great influence there. And I could go on, but needless to say, he's a highly sought after speaker, teacher, just a guy that's been a great mentor to many of us. And again, he keynotes all over the world to all types of organizations. So we're going to get into Vast Data today. But before we do that, Tom, if it's okay, you've had a pretty big week, and many of us are familiar with Carl Eschenbach, and I sent around, by the way, the Notre Dame video, and a lot of people really enjoyed that, by the way.
Cool.
But you sit on the board of one of his companies that's funded by Sequoia, and you guys have just had an exceptional week. So do you want to take us through that quickly?
Yeah, so I've been on the board of UiPath for 4 years. When I joined, and they're an interesting company, founded in Romania. The founder grew up under communism, actually, in Romania. The guy said to me one time, I'm on Varonis's board too, and Kevin Kamali of Excel said, "I wanted to get you on another board. I found one. It's a Romanian company." I said, "Stop right there." Nothing good's ever happened after that comment, ever. Like, really. So anyway, long story short, and Daniel Dines, as the CEO, said last night, Excel invested and valued them at 100 million in 2017, April. And we met in August, and we just clicked. And I'd comment on Vast too, but the way I've been very fortunate as far as finding teams that are good teams, but the commonality is the CEO, brilliant, understands technology, knows what problem he's going to solve, has a unique way of doing it, cares about people. That's not always true of engineering-oriented people. No offense if you're an engineer. I mean, a lot of times they're good at the technology, but not so much the culture. So this week, we had a public offering yesterday, an IPO in a choppy market for, the high PE ratio stocks, Snowflake, CrowdStrike, Datadog, Zoom, and Okta have gone down 20 to 30% in the last 60 days. So this is a high PE ratio company now. And so we were a little concerned about how the market would receive it, but we went public as the second highest market cap in the history of software companies.
Wow.
We were public, and we also took the third most money ever, $1.34 billion. And the stock went public at 56, closed yesterday at 65, to 63. The market today is down 300 points, and they're up 7. They hit 80 today.
Wow.
So the market cap is currently 40 billion. That's pretty spectacular. So last night we had a pretty good party at the Soho Grand rooftop. None of us have seen each other in over a year. So it was confluence of events. It was great.
Yeah, and I'll bet that, again, with the pandemic and not being able to see each other, I'll bet you that was quite a reunion / celebration to pull off what you did. And you've done it virtually. You've done it via Zoom and WebEx over these, last few months. So incredible.
One of the things that I believe to be true is that the digital transformation we all know is going to be real. But for most of my experience, people talking about it, nothing really changes. They talk, but nothing. And I just think the pandemic's been a major accelerant.
Yeah.
It didn't change the outcome, but Carl made a comment yesterday. He believes, or maybe it's him or Daniel, that he believes it moved it up by 10x. And so in their particular case where they automate work, if people right now going back to a hybrid, they need to automate a lot of things because they're not doing it the way they used to do it. So it kind of leans right into what they happen to excel at. And I think any company that can help people change the way they do work to be more efficient is going to be very hot.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on UiPath. That's really exciting. And
Thank you.
what a great story again for Romanian founder and just incredible. So great American story there. Love it. Hey, you mentioned the fact that a lot of times, with certain founders, there's a struggle in culture, right? Just how they think and coming out. And we here at Trace3 we've got our Founders Formula podcast, which we're excited about. And episode 24 was Renan Halleck, who's the founder, right, of Vast Data. And, he mentioned you in that podcast, and I'll just invite everybody to chase that one down. It's just a great interview. Yeah. But I was going to say, again, you're very connected and you've got the opportunity to do almost anything you want in this industry. Why did you choose to go on board with Vast Data?
No one was more shocked than me. Michael, back that up.
Oh, no doubt. I was second.
Yeah. There's a world-class investor, the CEO of Insight, who asked me as a favor to go talk to them because they were raising around and they were one of the people looking at investing. And so I said, well, I'll go. I'm not really interested. I don't want to get back in the storage industry right now. I've kind of, I've done it for so long, 25 years. I'm thinking, what could be new? Really, at this point, you just take a little different angle on the same shot. It's not that. And so I sat down with Renan, and I was blown away at how impressed I was by him, by what he was telling me about. Where he really got me was he's saying, look, Tom, people can store data in a lot of ways. They never have been able to get the insights they need out of the data, which I've heard for 20-some years at NetApp. People have this island and that island and that island, and they can do stuff within that island, but they're not getting insights across the infrastructure. And then he explained to me that, first of all, he had a tremendous background in success before, Extreme IO. And he talked about a clean sheet of paper and being able to use all flash, and you can put all your data there, and you can get all your insights from everything. And then he talked to me about, here comes AI, which I've looked at for a couple of years, and that does play into what UiPath does too. With AI, the challenges and the opportunities for that data are immensely different, so much more broad. And so I sat there, he just was right on the pulse of where I thought if you could do it, it would work. And one other topic, the Verona CEO, Yaki Feidelson, worked for me at NetApp. And in my opinion, he's one of the brightest people I've ever met, spectacular CEO at Verona's. But on technology, and he called me 2 years before, and I forgot all about it, to tell me Vast was coming at us stealth, and NetApp should look at these guys. They have an incredible technology coming out of Israel, and Yaki's from Israel. And so I called the VP of engineering of NetApp, said, did you look at it when I called? He said, yeah. And I thought, if they could do what they're saying they're doing, this is unbelievable. But we had just bought SolidFire. We couldn't, they weren't going to do it. Yeah. But he said to me, but if they need a board member, I think there's a problem. And then Mike and Renan and I had lunch. And again, we weren't talking about a board. Renan said, we just appreciate your advice. And I honestly went because I just liked the guy. I really liked Renan. And we had
me, not so much, Tyler.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I hadn't met you yet. And then we sat down and I said to him a few things. I was blown away by how fast they're getting started. Number one. Number two, the size of the transactions. I mean, their average sale was around $700,000 and multi-petabytes, new accounts. Very hard to do for a young company. Normally you start with smaller deals and build up. So it was very clear that there was a significant appetite for what they were doing, and their customer satisfaction was sky high. Yeah. Sky high. John Morgridge was my boss at Stratus before he became CEO at Cisco. I said, how did you figure out Cisco? He said, I called all their customers. I said, you gonna buy more? Yeah, okay. Everybody said that. Well, their customers are all buying more. I'm like, I can follow that trend line. So, and one of the things, and Michael chatted about this, I said to him, you guys thought about doing a consumption type model, because it's very hard to do when you get bigger. We tried it in NetApp for many years. It's very hard to do. Again, you have different product lines and stuff. And what they did recently, there, that webcast I did with Carl Eschenbach, Carl made a great point about innovation.
Yeah.
He said there's three ways to innovate. One is the one we always think about, organically and engineering. You got to be able to do that usually. Number two, remember Carl was at EMC there for a while. They were very good at acquiring companies and adding it to a portfolio. So that's a second form of, they're both important. You got to be good at both. And he said, but the one that most people don't think about is go-to-market innovation. And I just threw it out as an idea. But the program that Mike actually launched recently, Mike, maybe we could spin this to you, because I think the missing component from a customer point of view is, are they selling it to me the way I want to buy it? Or do I have to buy into some big solution and then grow into it to get the economics right?
Right.
So Mike, could you comment on the program you recently launched?
Sure, Tom, and it's my lucky spot to be following that intro and all the success you've had in your career, and
Thank you.
and by the way, congratulations on UiPath. That's an amazing story and just incredible. Yeah, so Tom, it's funny. We've been getting pressure from our investors to embrace a consumption model. That seems to be all the rage around software companies. But in the early days, the first couple of years we were selling Vast, we just married up to the existing business model that everybody else had. And it wasn't until I saw that podcast with you and Carl, where he talked about innovation at the business model level, where it clicked, where the idea of looking for a way to put a consumption model that is incredibly beneficial for customers. So let me talk about something that is a really big pain point for customers. It's a great thing for storage vendors, but it's not a great thing for customers, and that's the infinite refresh cycle. And there's this, decades and decades and decades of storage companies, and I was part of that. I was guilty of basically planning obsolescence, where they ride the Intel CPU curve and they introduce a new generation of their product every 2 years. And typically what that means for customers is that every 4 years, they're financially engineered into a technology refresh. They're also, part of that refresh, they do get a faster storage system, but they then have to go through a business impacting data migration. They've got to take outages with their business. There's a lot of pain associated with that. The second big thing is that after, let's say you have a 4-year life cycle on your storage investments, every time you buy a storage upgrade between the original system and when you eventually refresh it, every single time you're getting a worse and worse deal. Like if you take 4 years as an example, 2 years in, if you buy an upgrade, you're only going to get 2 years of useful life out of that investment. So it's a bad investment. It's really, really expensive when a customer looks underneath the covers at those upgrade costs. And so what's unique about Vast is that our systems are always backward and forward compatible. And that's because of our asymmetric architecture. And there was a former CEO of Legato, David Wright. He was on stage at EMC World. I was part of EMC for 15 years. And he said, storage architectures are really interesting in that, you don't get born a dog and die a cat. And what he meant by that is that the decisions you make when you're innovating that system, you're stuck with them for the entire life cycle of that platform, which could last 20 and 30 years and beyond. And so with Vast, because we're asymmetric, because we can, as new generations of hardware become available, we can just add them to that scale out cluster. We were like, it was like a just a moment where it just hit me, where if we could put a business model in place that allows customers to just avoid that forced technology refresh and just adopt new hardware as it becomes available, we could change the industry. We could literally turn it upside down. So from my standpoint, another big thank you to you and Carl for hosting that, for having that podcast, because it probably never would have happened. We'd still be selling the old-fashioned way.
So if I'm a customer now, how do I buy the product? And at the same time, you became a software only company.
So
Right.
and this is something we really put a lot of effort in. It took us almost 8 months to get to put in place what we wanted to have customers experience when they made a purchase. So first things first, we do most of our business through the channel, just about 100%. It's like 99%. We had a couple of deals where customers just insisted that we take it direct, but we are as close to 100% channel as you can be. So they still issue a single purchase order to that channel partner. And then we've already put all of the processes in place so that our contract manufacturer, who we've been using for 3 years, so that hasn't, or for 2 years, that hasn't changed. They are going to build the physical hardware and ship it to the customer. And what arrives at the customer's loading dock is a turnkey appliance. So their experience doesn't change whatsoever, but they get all the benefits of Gemini, where they get this infinite storage lifecycle, where you really never have to worry about a big bang monolithic tech refresh ever again. We've just eliminated it.
Yeah, and also they can ride the hardware curves down, right?
And they can ride the hardware curves. Exactly.
On those that's unique.
And here's a great, this is something that didn't even occur to us until we launched the program. So we launched it in February. We made the big, public announcement a couple of weeks ago, but because we wanted to shake the kinks out, see if there was something we didn't see. And one of our customers bought a system recently, and they wanted to add more performance. So that means you need front-end compute capacity, right? In the world of storage, historically, you would call that a storage controller. But in our architecture, we don't have a concept of a storage controller. So it's just compute nodes. But a few months ago, when we were selling like everybody else in the industry, storage controllers from EMC, you might pay $200,000 or $300,000 for that. In our world, you're buying servers like you would from your server vendors, $6,000 per compute node. And each one of those is adding another 50,000 IOPS to your environment. And there's no software tax at all, no vendor tax. You're just buying all of the hardware at cost as soon as it becomes available.
Incredible. Hey, I just want to make a quick comment for everybody listening. One of the things that's extraordinary about VAST is the fact that you are the fastest growing storage company in history, but you've done it during a pandemic, which is just, it's absolutely, it's outrageous. And Mike, I think you've hit on some things, right, that back that up. But one of the things, Tom, you were talking about innovation, and I love the way Carl broke that down kind of into the 3 areas. But I wanted to ask you, look, I'm an old storage guy. I come from that background. And, as I listened to, again, this Founders Formula podcast, I was listening to Renan talk about some changes that have taken place in underlying technologies, or let's call them neighboring technologies, that allowed this to be the perfect time for VAST. Can you hit on that quickly, Mike?
Sure. Well, if you think about it, for the last 40 years, storage companies have all been doing the same thing. They've been buying servers from server manufacturers, switches from the networking companies, drives from drive manufacturers, and then they're attaching it all together, and they're layering their software on top of it. And what is underneath the covers inside of just about every one of those existing systems is a protocol. It's a SaaS protocol, which came out. I went and looked it up on Wikipedia. That protocol was actually invented in 1978, SCSI protocols. And so that underneath the covers forces this marriage of the front end compute infrastructure with the back end drives, a tight coupling of the physical hardware. In our world, we all think that Renan, our CEO, is as smart as you can get in this industry. But the reality is he could not have built VAST until 2018, when NVMe over fabrics became available and emerged. And what that allows you to do is to get access to data over a network, not coupled, but over a network, as if it's locally attached. And that's a game changer. It opens up a completely new way to architect the storage system. So most of the large scale out NAS systems that have been in the market for decades, and when I say decades, yes, I am implying that they're old and legacy and tired, maybe past their prime, but I'm not going to go into that type of stuff. But yeah, so they have shared nothing architectures, meaning each physical controller controls a set of drives with that system. And if that controller goes away, the whole system goes haywire. You've got a degraded performance state that you've got to deal with until you get back to a steady state. And some of these architectures, it could literally take weeks and months if they've got petabytes of capacity to scan the entire file system and to make sure everything's where it's supposed to be before you get back to steady state performance. In our architecture, the front end is completely decoupled from the back end. So every physical compute node on the front end can see every drive. If we have thousands of drives in the system, it's got direct one-hop access to every one of those drives. And that's not anything that we, innovated. That's the benefit of NVMe over fabrics. And if you look across the industry, you'll see a lot of marketing content from the vendors talking about how they're NVMe over fabrics ready, because they can't simply adopt this new protocol. They can't just change it out because of what I said earlier. These architectures, you don't get born a dog and die a cat. You're stuck with that SAS protocol probably in perpetuity. And we've got a huge advantage. We don't see anybody in our rearview mirror, and we're excited about that, right? We think we have a huge advantage, 3 to 5 year head start on everybody else in the industry, and they're all playing catch up.
Yeah.
If you think, Tyler, you and I were both at NetApp, and the reason NetApp was able to approach it differently is the speed of networks. It wasn't there until we came from Auspex. Dave Hitch, James Lau, and I, Dave, the founders, and they came in and gave a presentation to the CEO, and they said, with the speed of networks today, we could do it in software using off-the-shelf hardware. We don't have to create. It had been done in hardware. Disadvantage of that, it took forever for an upgrade, very costly, as you said, Mike, each component. And the CEO says, I don't like that because you can't lock people in. Wrong answer. So they're never locked in. We got to keep innovating. But that innovation, if the network speed hadn't done that, we couldn't have done it. Right. And if the guys who were already making systems didn't want to do it because they already had existing architectures. So this game has played out in open windows for innovation multiple times. And as Mike said, this only came along in 2018. These guys were in Israel, and coming from, tremendous storage backgrounds. Yaki Veronis has a spectacular engineering team. Yaki said to me up front, he says, Tom, in Israel, we all know each other. I can tell you where the really strong engineering teams. This is a spectacularly good engineering team with 4 fantastic architects. Renan would tell you, they're as good as they get. And the thing that got me to come, to net it out, Renan called me up and he said, Yaki told me that you won't come unless you think this could be really big. I said, happens to be true. For the reason you said. And he said, this is what they do today. This is what they've delivered. But he said, if people still view us as a storage company in 2 to 3 years, that we failed. Yeah. Because the missing piece is being able to understand what's happening with that data. And the tools that have been written for the old monolithic architectures that have been here are not where the tools are going to be for AI. And so they have a team of very, very smart people thinking, how do we mine this data holistically to make it very easy to get at and get insights from, to get you to make better business decisions rapidly. Now you're talking about changing how people work again. You're delivering something that fundamentally changes from an IT perspective, how you have to manage it. And the other thing that happens when real innovation happens like this, and this is what's happened, where the similarity is with UiPath, you're moving away from just making an IT decisions to people who are trying to drive a business better, faster. Digital innovation has to happen at a whole different speed. So you need something simpler, faster, that doesn't take a bunch of wizards to make it work. It's just got to be able to give you insights. That's where they're going. Yeah. And I think that is an extraordinary, and the other guys are going to have trouble doing it because they're not set up to do it. That wasn't their mission. These guys came at it with that mission.
Yeah.
It's an idea.
It's truly, it's unbelievably compelling. And by the way, for what it's worth, part of why we're doing this today is we see so many workloads moving to your storage. And again, fastest growing company of all time and in a pretty tricky period. So, hey, Tom, I want to shift gears just quickly because, it's interesting as we introduce our clients to new and emerging technology, we're pretty careful about, hey, is this company well-funded? Are they financially sound? Do they have the type of valuation that they can withstand the storms? And clearly, Vast Data does, right? We're excited about that aspect. But one of the things we think about is culture. And we started talking about culture early on on this call. And you know, you and I both know when you're, you know, I've done 3 startups. I've been bought 3 times. And, you know, a lot of folks may not know this, but when there's 10 of you in a room, elbow to elbow, culture's pretty easy because you're working
Right.
long hours. You know, I listen to what you say and I copy it, and that culture's easy. But, you know, you've gone at Vast Data from tens of people to hundreds of people very quickly to thousands of people now is, you know, kind of on your radar. So I guess my question is, how do you, as you grow and you're, you know, especially in the middle of a pandemic where you're separated, how do you keep that culture pure? How do you keep it strong and keep momentum as you go from tens of people to hundreds of people? And then in the future, certainly you guys are staring at thousands of people.
Let me make a comment and I'll let Mike talk about it. So he's one of the first people driving the culture. But what impressed me was when the pandemic hit in March, they made it they just got valued at 1.2 billion, which was much higher than people thought they were going to get when they first went out. And they hadn't even spent their Series A yet at all. They took it because it was there and it was very high valuation. But they basically did not hire. This makes their growth story even crazier. Mike shut off the hiring with Renan for the field last March and didn't open it till a few months ago. Because they say, look, it's an uncertain market. We don't want to throw people into new jobs where they can't even call on people. It's not fair to them. I don't think it's, but that's a major risk because your growth could stop. With that said, they posted that year last year. And now, and I have personal experience with some of the people that they've hired, they're hiring people who have done spectacularly well before, have tremendous customer confidence, and were critical pieces, in my case, of the NetApp culture, the best of it. And so I've just been impressed that they've done it. They're hiring by ones, you know, they're going, that's the guy, that's the girl, that's the woman. And the teams they're bringing together are, you know, I think if you're very clear about your culture and you state what it is, I could tell you both what it is. I tell you, here's the upside and here's the risks, and here's what we do. And Mike could go, that's for me, and Tyler goes, that's not for me. You're both right.
Right.
But the people coming in are not being fooled. They know what they're joining, and they're like, you know, at first board call I was on with Reddit, I had to take a step back because they said things you're doing right and things you got to do better. And the number one thing he highlighted doing right, we're building a world-class sales organization I'm proud of. Now that's an engineer talk. And I was like, hallelujah. I love that. Because I've seen that work extremely well. If you're smart enough to understand. And he also said to me recently, Mike, and you can go like this, you might bring it up to him sometime. The hardest job in this company is the people on the front line. It happens to be factual. Certainly in this time, it's factual. So I was just so impressed from the top down. There's a complete feeling of we, when they talk about the numbers, we have to help the customers. It's not you. You have to do better. You have to deliver. And someone's like a scorekeeper. The whole organization is built upon customer success and making sure that they're all in it together. Mike, that's my turtle view.
I'm chuckling over here because, you know, going back to, you know, how Tom ended up on our board, there's a backstory there from our perspective. Renan came to me, I guess it was the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And he said, listen, Mike, you know, we've got a great board, but they're all investors and we need to bring somebody onto the board, you know, with more of a business perspective, get somebody with some, you know, ability to guide us on decisions and things we were going to do. And so he said, you know, what are your thoughts? I said, you know, give me a few days. Let me think about it. And you know, for me, you know, culture is absolutely critical. I mean, it could kill a startup. I mean, in a big company, you can hide, you can have a pretty stinky culture and still get away with it in a lot of cases, if you have a lot of run rate business and whatnot. But, you know, I love EMC, and there's unbelievable EMC executives that we were considering approaching and whatnot. But man, I just kept coming back to Tom, and I had only met Tom twice in my entire life. And if you added up the amount of time we spent together, it was about 11 seconds. I shook his hand twice at Bank of New York, as he was trying to get into my stronghold account. I had every ounce of business out there at one time, and son of a bitch, NetApp got in. And when Tom was got to New York, you should have seen, if he'd come to New York on a visit, going to see customers, emails were exploding on the EMC side, right? So it was like, oh my God, Tom's at UBS, Tom's at Goldman, Tom's there. Tom was freaking everywhere. We're like, what the hell? But that's not my point, right? He was a pain in the butt, no doubt, to compete with. But the hardest thing I ever tried to do in my career was hire NetApp people. I think if you totaled it up, I was 0 for 706 in my career. You couldn't drag them out of NetApp. And I was like, what is the loyalty? Where is it coming from? And I have good friends over there. So I had drinks and dinner one night with a good friend of mine, Mike Sweeney. And he was just, it's Mendoza, it's Tom. And so I went back to Renan about a week later, and I said, we gotta get in touch with Tom Mendoza. We got to get him. We can get business advice on how to do a business model here and there, but culture is tricky, man. It's really, really, really tricky. Yeah. And so, since he's been on board, he's never not available. Like literally never not available. I tap into Tom and his guidance and his advice. He's been on our last couple of all hands and sales kickoff meetings, and just sharing his perspective. And so, having him join Vast was a monumental moment. If you look at our trajectory, it was great until last August. And I'm not saying it's all Tom, right? But sorry, Tom. But I am saying that at that moment in time, I'll tell you where the biggest impact on us has been the credibility it's given us in recruiting people to Vast. And we're going through the biggest growth period of our go-to-market right now. We did pause hiring. We thought it was the pragmatic and smart business decision at the time.
Very smart.
And it worked out, right? Knock on wood. We were a little bit nervous last March and April, but it worked out. We thank our customers for trusting in us and investing in us. And the one thing it's funny, you guys both mentioned customers and how important that is. And it's another, it's something else everybody talks about, right? But as part of Gemini, we introduced a support offering where each and every one of our customers will get a dedicated senior technical engineer that is going to be aligned to their account, and they don't get charged for that. They're getting, like, in my world at EMC for many, many years, the biggest complaint I would hear about support is, follow the sun support, and they would get a new person every time they dialed into that support organization, and it was massive. And in this case, we want to give a real white glove personal touch to our customers to help with onboarding and training, ongoing questions. 90+% of the issues a customer may have over the life cycle of their system, we want the co-pilot to deal with them. And we announced that, last month, and analyst community is raving about it, and customers love it. And so we're excited about that too. But culture is king.
Yeah. By the way,
let me just comment on that culture, on the customer piece. I love what Mike just said about that program. I've been in situations where we did that and it worked so well. And in big companies, at some point, there's budget talk, and they go, that's so expensive. And you go, whoa, this is not that, there's a disadvantage for being small you can't do anything about. You haven't been around that long. The advantage is you don't have a lot of people pushing on you, trying to figure out different stuff. This is what we did at NetApp when we attacked. One of the reasons we were difficult, because we knew exactly what we were doing, very focused, and we were so aligned around the customer, top to bottom of the company. That program, Renan approved like that, blew my mind that they would think of that at this point. It's fantastic. But a wrong CEO would say, I don't know if we want to spend that money on that. Why don't we, there's got to be a less expensive way of doing it. You know what? It's very, very expensive to lose a customer. And more so, it's such an opportunity to make them all successful.
That's right.
And then they'll go tell a friend. The best salesman is your customer.
Yeah.
Did they do what they said? How did it work out?
Yeah, Tom, I was just going to say, Mike, I was going to you made a funny comment about you've got these accounts and you would see, Tom coming and going, wait, where is this guy right now? I was going to tell kind of a funny story, and Tom, you're going to forgive me on this one, I hope. But years ago, we used to track, we'd be like, hey, where's Tom today, right? Because you knew, hey, he was traveling and wherever he was going to go, right? We were going to move the needle. And one day in one of the offices, one of the guys goes, Tom's in Israel today. And I said, who's he meeting with? And he said, I think he's meeting with the prime minister. And I said, he's meeting with Shimon Peres right now. And he's, yeah. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So anyway, the joke was, I walked out and I go, well, now he's taking on, peace in the Middle East and he's going to solve it. Anyway, I do, Tom, I want to hit on I've got it, believe it or not, I've got a bunch of old school guys that are sending me texts through this, and I'm reading some texts.
Cool.
Some good questions. So I wanted to throw one out because a lot of questions on culture, Tom, that people want to hear about. So everybody listening in today, is on a team, has a team, leads a team, but we're all on teams. And one of the questions that came through was, how do you know if you've got the right team? And specifically, as you drill down to a person, you say, how do I know if this person's either the right person to hire for the job, or maybe it's somebody who's in that role that you've got to make a decision on? We're all evaluating teams all the time, but how do you go through that decision process of whether or not somebody's the right person?
I have an answer. So I came up with a system which I believe is infallible.
Sure.
And I came up with it 20 something years ago. And it was because I'd been promoted up where, so you said something earlier, when it was small enough, I knew everybody. And then we grew, and as much traveling as I did it so I would be in front with the team, right? But all of a sudden, you don't see everything. I have managers reporting to managers. And so I came up with something on a plane one time, and it never failed me after. So if you say to people, now this has to do with existing teams. If you say to somebody who's ever managed a very large organization, or any organization actually, when you have to take an action on somebody, that's not necessarily fire them. It could be you need them to do something different. You're evaluating, but you probably have to do something. And eventually you do something. Did you move too slow, too fast, or perfect? And almost anybody who's honest will say too slow.
Too slow.
And the reason is, in their mind, well, I just wanted to be fair. Well, the fact of the matter is your experience told you, you knew, but you waited for all the data to prove it. And that's why it's too slow. So I have a way to make that never happen again. And it didn't happen to me again. And I believe most people who work for me, if they're on this phone, know that when I got involved in something, I was very decisive about things. And the way I got there was, take any employee you have, take every one of your employees if you can, in your case, Mike, direct reports, whatever, and put strengths on one side of the page, areas of improvement on the other, and write one thing fast, very fast. First thing comes to your mind. And whichever way your pen goes tells you all you want to know. Doesn't matter what you write. If you think of a superstar that you have working for you, Mike, there's no chance you're going areas of improvement. None. Bing, 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 bing. And then you'll go in fairness. That's what I call areas of improvement instead of weakness. Everybody has things they can improve upon. But if you go right to areas of improvement, doesn't do this, doesn't do this, doesn't do this, doesn't do this, then you go, but in fairness, just stop. Throw your fairness one out the window. And what do I do with that? I go talk to them right away. 100% of the time, I call them in, I go, Tyler, you do a lot of things really well. This, and this. But and I know you have an ambition to do this job, but there are things that you do that are going to stop that from happening. There are things that you do that drive me nuts. And at the end of the day, I had a guy say to me, well, you're not happy, and I'm not happy. So look at an org chart. It's much more important I'm happy than you're happy. Just saying. At the end of the day, you might want to look at that. So I'm telling you, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to change it. You will not be late again for a meeting, or you won't have a second chance. You will, whatever it is. And guess what happens? You now have moved. If you don't do that, you start to avoid the person. You don't want to talk to them. They irritate the shit out of you. So what do? And by the time you talk to them, I've had people say, well, I'm gonna let Joey go. Oh, really? Was he a bad hire? Did he not meet the criteria? No, he was good. He met the criteria. He's not performing, whatever. And I go, well, what did he say when you told him? Oh, I haven't had the chance to tell him. You haven't told him anything and you're about to let him go. That's fair.
Right.
So to me, you don't have to have all the data. You just say, listen to me, you need to know that these kind of things are making me think poorly of you. And you have the chance to change that. That's why I'm telling you, it's not terrible, but it's going to take you the wrong direction. You're not going to get where you want to go. And we're probably going to have a bad outcome. Yeah. I've had amazing success with that. One way or the other, very few people, but I have had people say, well, I'm not going to change those things. I'm leaving. Okay. That actually was a good day because I moved it out. But in most cases, people are not self-aware and they don't realize they're doing it. They just don't. And I had a big time senior executive at NetApp last another 15 years and retire very, very high up, who would have been gone if he didn't do what I told him to do in that meeting. I told him point blank. He was in Singapore. He flew back and was in my office the next morning. He didn't even stay. And he said, you're right and I'm wrong. And I don't know if I could change, but I want the chance. I said, okay, because he was changing our culture. He told me this guy in the briefing center was getting fired. This guy worked for me for 15 years, 2 different companies. I said, really? What did he do? He said, I don't know, but he did something that was disruptive. I said, you don't know. You're going to fire the guy, you don't know what he did? Well, my team said, I said, well, why don't you go talk to him? He goes, that's where we're different. You know, I believe you have to have a hierarchical, and I don't believe it's my job. I'm like, I woke up in the middle of the night. I said, I can't allow that. That's not our culture. Our culture is a very personal. I'm in with you until you don't show me I shouldn't be. That's something I've always believed in, by the way. When you hire somebody, there are cultures that say, look, for 6 months, they're on the outside until they prove themselves. I don't believe that at all. You take all that time to hire them, you commit to them, you got to make them successful. Tim Duncan, when he won his last title with San Antonio, there was an article in the Sports Illustrated. He said every time every free agent and every top draft pick, he holds a team meeting and says, what are we going to do to make sure they're successful? I love that. Yeah. They didn't say, what are they going to do for us? What are we going to do to make them successful? Because once you put everything into that and it doesn't work, there's no harm, no foul. Then you know what you got to do. But if you haven't done your part, that's why I said, what did you do to help this person? Then you can make the call. But if you do that on a piece of paper, I guarantee you get some eye-opening. And again, you don't have to fire anybody. Just go talk to them and say, look, I have to tell you that the first thing you think about is problems. There's a problem. I'm just telling you. And you don't have to be able to, what we all try to do wrong at the beginning is get it perfectly in our minds before we say something. You don't have to. Right. You know there's an issue. Put it on the table and let them, guess what? That's fair to them. They can change. They can fix it. But I have found many people are not that self-aware on the other side. Am I doing that? Yeah. I don't think I'm doing that. Well, again, look at that org chart.
Tom, I for anybody listening, and again, we've got some great comments and texts coming through, but one of the things I say behind your back, listen, we've used a lot of your principles at Trace3, and I've been here 8 years, and we've quadrupled the company in 8 years, and that's based on a lot of these principles that really work. And it's why we ask some of this stuff that people go, hey, why do you dive into culture and why do you get on? Because this is the stuff that drives the engine. Hey, I wanted to, as we were getting on the call and everybody was, logging in, I was talking with you quickly about, as a company, our internal theme this year, we called it Limitless, right, for 2021. And it was this idea of like, hey, how far could you really go if you really pushed, right? And I shared with you, Tom, I've been sharing stories across the company of people that I know personally that I'm like, hey, good guy, good athlete, but they rose to levels that it was staggering when they really leaned in. And I shared the story about a kid that's about to get drafted in the NFL, who's gone from like not a standout in high school to a standout in college, All-American. Now he's entering the draft as a top guy. You and I have talked about this wrestler that we both know who won the gold medal in Sydney in 2000 and was just an 2001 underdog. But again, a guy that was a college teammate of mine that I was like, hey, he's a good wrestler. Do I think he's ever going to beat that Russian? And by the way, we don't have time for the Russian story, but that was a guy that had not lost in 13 years. And it
He'd not been, Tyler, he'd not been scored upon.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Carolyn had not been scored upon.
That's
He's
right.
a monster.
Right. So where I'm going with this, and there is a question, but where I'm going with this is, I keep trying to push people on this idea of like, hey guys, what could you do if you really went all in? If you really just went for it? And I wanted to ask you, has there been a time in your life where, maybe you felt like, man, I'm going out of my comfort zone. I'm going to go do something that maybe doesn't feel great to me. But as you pushed yourself, you realized limits that you didn't think were possible, and you came out, victorious. And I'd love to hear anything you got to add there.
My life changed my sophomore year at Notre Dame because of what you're talking about. Completely changed. I went to Notre Dame. I was a wrestler. I had scholarships to the top 3 wrestling schools in the United States: Iowa State, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. And then I took a bad injury, which made that very tenuous. They all pointed out it's a 1-year scholarship, not 4 year. And it was a broken face injury, broke the bones here, guy hurt me on purpose in a match. Long story short, Notre Dame coach comes to the hospital, says, if you can get to Notre Dame, we'll give you our first scholarship. And I said, they just told me I'll never wrestle again. He said, I'm not surprised, but we'll take the chance. We'll give you a 2-year scholarship. And if you can't wrestle, we'll make sure you can get loans. My dad was sitting right. My dad cried. I'd never seen my dad cry before. And so I go to Notre Dame. I had no experience with Notre Dame. I'm not Catholic. I didn't know what state it was in. So it's not like today, everybody's dying to get in there. I got there and I got intimidated because all these kids came from private schools. I'm a public school kid. They'd all taken advanced placement. We got there the first day and they read all the advanced placement stuff. And I'm like, am I supposed to know what that is? That doesn't go so well. And so I went from being one of the smartest kids naturally in a public school. It was just it wasn't the same pressure cooker as the private schools. They were basically saying, we grade on a curve and you really got to put your work in. And the way but I was cooler than the other guys. The other guys were all private school, all boys schools. They couldn't do it. So I was the fun guy who still did almost as good as them. That was my niche. Way more fun, almost as good on grades. And so I got in an argument with this guy my sophomore year. I'm burying the guy. I thought he was going to cry. And I was a classic New Yorker, never in doubt. Necessarily right. Never in doubt. And, so I'm talking, and finally he walks away. And on every hall, they have a senior guy that's supposed to look out for you. I never talked to the guy till that moment. He walks up to me and he said, Tom, do you think you won that argument? I'm like, do I think you won? I won. He said, of course I won. He said, what was his point? I said, I have no idea. I'm not sure he talked, did he? He's like, yeah, I know you don't. Because you don't listen at all. I mean, he was trying to make a point. Quite honestly, I thought he was trying to make a pretty good point, but you had no idea because you didn't stop talking. I'm getting a little pissed off. I'm on wrestling, right? So I'm a little pissed off. And then he said, Tom, you do pretty well in your grades. I know everybody's grades here. You do almost as well as these other guys. I said, but you don't work very hard. I'm like, glad you noticed. And he said, Tom, do you think you're going to go to grad school after this? I said, I don't know. I haven't decided yet. He said, well, it's not actually a decision. You got to get in. And I said, I'm interested. You're going to say, my grades aren't as good, but I don't work too hard. Do you think that's going to push you over the top? Didn't sound that good when someone verbalized it like that. He said, let me help you here. The reason you don't work hard is you're intimidated. And you're afraid that if you do everything possible, you're not going to do any better. And you're really not as good as these guys. That's the reality. And he walked away. And I was so pissed off. I went and ran around the lakes at Notre Dame. And halfway through, I stopped and I said, he's right. I'm afraid to challenge myself because what if I can't do it? And I changed at that moment. And I said, listen, I am scared, but I'm gonna, and it wasn't about competing with the other kids. It's about, can I really do this? What is my limit? And I excelled beyond my dreams. My junior year and my senior year became very easy because of it, because I got into it. And from that moment on, I can honestly say I was never outworked. You saw me work at NetApp. I mean, I was on playing. I just like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it's not because I didn't go for it, completely go for it. And, you know, I have a goaling system. I don't want to do it now, Tyler. It'll take too long, but it kind of led to this. In 1989, I went to Stanford for 6 weeks for their executive program. And there was a study out of Yale where 90% of high performance people have time-bound measurable written goals. And then the second point was less than 10% of people have that. I'm like, I don't have that. Not given to you by someone else, not your boss, you. And so I developed a goaling system, which if you go to YouTube, I talk about, but Forbes.com, if you just do my name, yes, I don't know, 400,000 views or something, but many, many people have changed their life using that system, including me. And basically it's built upon making yourself proud of yourself. Up till that moment, I'd always try to make other people proud of me, whether it's my first wife or my parents or whatever. I can tell you when you look back at your life, it really only matters whether you're proud of yourself. It doesn't matter. You're not going to go to them to find out if you did good or not. And so I started to say, I did this goaling system to raise my expectations of myself. Because I was a vice president of half the country of a company called Stratus Computer, which quite honestly was way beyond where I expected early on. And I was very close to settling into this is, man, I've done great. And then I realized, you know what? I'm not challenging myself to see how far I could go. I was falling into, and so I started raising my aspirations. And by doing I'll do this for you real quick. Do I have time to? I'll do it very quick. Sure. I said 3 personal goals and 3 professional goals. And I do personal first. Why is that? Because if you feel good about yourself, people react to you differently. You walk into a room with confidence. You go into a customer, they know it. So the question I ask myself is, if I do what, do I feel good about myself? 3 things for 90 days written down. You got to measure them. So as an example, 3 times a week on a treadmill, 30 minutes is fine. Not, I'm going to get in shape. It's not measurable. Something measurable. So I write 3 things that are going to make me feel good about myself. And then for work, it's what am I going to do to make an impact? I'm not here to fit in. What am I going to do to make an impact? And I write 3 things down. The first one's I don't communicate with anybody because I don't want to prove to them I'm making goals. I want to prove to me that I can do extraordinary things. And then the second one, I tell my boss, at that point was the CEO, and then the head of sales when I was president. And I remember one time Rob Samuel was head of sales. He said, you know, you had to go to China on there and do all these visits. I wouldn't do that because we have 4 other execs going. I know they want you, but you were there 3 months ago. Would you mind picking 4 cities that haven't seen you in years, like Kansas City, one Portland, and we'll host dinners. You could draw a crowd. That's great. So point is, now I have 6 things. This is going to make an impact. It's going to make me feel good about myself. And I let it sit for one day, and I read every one of them out loud, and I ask myself one question. If I do that, will I be proud of myself? And I remember I was traveling, and I convinced myself I couldn't work out. I don't have time. It just means your priority's wrong. It's not a priority. And so I took that treadmill. I'll talk about it now. I wouldn't have done it at the time, but I made it 40 minutes instead of 30 minutes. I didn't make it 7 days a week, 2 hours. I would have quit in 2 days. Ah, shit, that's so good. But I'm telling you, when I passed 30 minutes to get to 40, my whole life experience changed because I was like, I'm going. And so after 90 days, sometimes I left them the same, but most times what happens is they become habit. You know, people use the word habit and always have negative connotations. Good habits are extraordinarily powerful. Right. You don't have to write. So I moved on to other things, but I changed one thing. So if I got 4 out of 6 my first time I ever did it, which sounds terrible, but I was exhilarated because I was driving where I was going, not my boss, not my family, me. And so I made an appointment. I made these things appointments with me that I wouldn't break. So for instance, I'm supposed to work out at 7:30 and you call me, Tyler, and you said, Tom, could you meet me in the office at 7:30? Normal reactions, yeah, that's more important than my workout. I said, you know, Tyler, I have an appointment at that time. Would it be possible for us to do it later? Sure. I almost never had to move him. Now, if it was an emergency, just like you would break a real appointment, you break it. But I didn't miss. And I didn't miss it. I started to raise my expectations of myself. You know, Rob Salmon was the first guy to follow that. He was Don Valentine, the most legendary investor ever in Silicon Valley, founded Sequoia Capital, was the investor in NetApp. Told me Rob was the first salesman the company's ever seen become president of that company, ever in Silicon Valley. He followed that system from day one. First time I ever talked to him, I talked to him about this. A guy named Simon Green runs Asia for Palo Alto now. Simon ran Asia for us. Simon was an accountant when I met him. He ended up running Asia by following that system. So I'm not telling you that's the only system, but I do think that if you want to, you should have something that you're driven toward, that you're driving the train, you're setting the expectations, and it changes everything. You're not making other people proud, you're making you proud.
Awesome. Awesome. Love it, Tom. Hey, gentlemen, we're coming up on the top of the hour. Tom, I love it. Again, I've got a lot of texts coming through. Guys, I won't be able to get to all of them, and we don't have time to respond or ask another question anyway.
We could have another session sometime.
Listen,
Let me
for
just say this. Varonis is a wonderful company. Yaki's stock has gone from 75 to over 150 in the last year. By the way, he did it by going to the model similar to what Mike's doing. Not Mike's is different, but it's allowing customers to buy the way they want to buy. Wonderful company. UiPath, I think we all would agree, is pretty spectacular at this point. Vast has that potential. Vast has the talent. It's got a beautiful vision of it. They got the right leader in Renan and Mike, the right leaders, and they're committed to customer excellence. And that, I think, if EFC was committed to customers, NetApp was committed to customers. You know, we fought like crazy, but we were two great companies, and customers knew they could depend upon us. If they chose whichever way they chose, the companies wouldn't let them down. And these guys have got that. So I'm extraordinarily excited to be on the board.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Tom. Mike, any final word before we jump?
Just what a great event. Tyler, you were a gracious host. And Tom, thank you so much. And, just on behalf of the company, we just couldn't be more psyched that you're on our board and
thank you.
And part of this magical journey that we're all on.
Amen. Well said. And hey, I want to remind everybody again who's dialed in today, Founders Formula podcast, Trace3. If you want to hear Renan Halleck's voice, brilliant. You'll hear more about how he thought this thing up and brought it to pass, and just some great stuff. But again, Mike and Tom, want to thank you for today. We love you both. Appreciate all the time and effort on our behalf, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you, Tyler. You're the best, man. You're the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mike. See you, Mike.
Bye, Tom.
Bye-bye.